So it's a Yedidik Sipa that the was really tormented the whole Yom Kippur, and he came to Nila all of a sudden, and Barditchev brightened up, just like he began to radiate joy. So they knew that whatever was going on had been resolved. That whatever that was obviously a very, very difficult prosecution against Klal Yisrael, and that something had happened to break through. So after Ma'ariv, Barditchev asked somebody to go. He told him that a short distance away there was a camp of soldiers, and that he should inquire for the commander. And when he found the commander, he should ask the commander to accompany him and come back with him to the Barditchev. So, time later, the shliach came back with this commander, the soldier, and he said, the Barditchev said to him, "Tell me what happened today with what happened unusual today for you." So he began to tell the story. There was a period of time in Russian history which is written up. This is not anything that's not been authenticated by secular historians, where the Tsar had groups of people going around kidnapping young Jewish children, Jewish boys, and because he knew that they would always somehow avoid getting into the army, and they would take these youngsters away, and they never would be heard from again, because they ended up being lifelong soldiers in the Tsar's army. And of course, once they were soldiers in the Tsar's army, they were taken away when they were 5, 6, 7 years old. There was no Shabbos, there was no Kashrus, there was no Torah, there was no davening, there was nothing. They had forgotten everything. These were called Kantanisten. These kidnappers, these children were the victims of the Kantanisten. So there was this commander told how he had been taken away when he was, whatever it was, 7 or 8 years old, and that his mother was helpless because the soldiers came in and grabbed him, and she stuffed into his hand a little siddur, which was her siddur. And she said, of course she was screaming and weeping, and she said to him, "Don't forget who you are." So he said, went away in the army, he said, "I put it in the bottom of my traveling sack," wherever it was. He says, "I would look at it." He said, "I didn't remember anymore how to read." And he said, "But I never went anywhere without that little siddur." He says, I rose in the ranks of the army, I became a commander, he said, and I became a commander of this group of soldiers. He said, and we're camped a short distance from here. He said, and we were near a village, and my soldiers went into the village, and I noticed that the Jews of the village were rushing around. And I asked them, "Why are you rushing around?" They said to me, "It's the holiest day of the year, it's Yom Kippur, and we're all preparing to go to shul." So he said there was a little tug in my heart. He said, so I stood outside the window and I watched, and they were all dressed in white in their kitlin and their taletzim, and they were davening, and it was a heartfelt davening. He said, I couldn't tear myself away. The next morning I came back and I stood outside the window and I watched them. And he said, the whole day, he said, I stood out the window. He said, and finally I couldn't take it anymore. He said, and I ran back to where we were camped, and I rummaged through my case, and I pulled out my mother's siddur, and I ran back, and I went inside, and I stood in the back. He said, and they were davening Nila, and he said the last prayer. He said, and it was so heartfelt. It was so they were calling out. He says, and I wanted to pray along with them. He says, my heart was torn. He said, and I opened up my mother's siddur. and I didn't know how to read. So he said, and I looked up, and I wanted to participate, and everybody was crying, and everybody was praying, and I wanted to share, and I didn't know how. So finally, I opened up the Siddur, and I said, Rabbi Michel, Master of the world, this is my mother's Siddur. You can look at these pages, they're yellow with her tears. I don't know how to pray. I don't know how to daven. But let the pages of my mother's Siddur pray for me. So he told the story, and Rabbi Shalom said, nobody could break through. He said that there was such a kitrig, there was such a prosecution because of everything that was going on. He said in Shemayim, nobody could get through. He says the soldiers Siddur. He said that let my mother's Siddur pray for me. He said that's what broke through. So we're here, and we have our mother's Siddur over here, Mama Rochel. Mama. Go back to the Kisei and call it Mama. Ask the Rabbi Shalom, where's his promise? He promised that we'd come back. There's such students. Mama. But Mama Siddur, be mispala for us. We've already forgotten how to daven, but Siddur still knows how to daven. Okay, we'll get weiter.